Welcome everyone to a video case study from Enabling Technologies. This one is on Azure Files, a new solution from Microsoft that allows you to move your SMB file shares to the cloud for international remote access. Today joining me is a valued customer. It's Brian Budemeyer. Brian is the VP of IT at Spang. Welcome, Brian. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Spang?
Hi, Chris, and sure, I can. Spang is a diversified manufacturing company. We've been in business since 1894. Right now in our evolution, we serve our customers through three product lines from two divisions. We have a magnetics division, which manufactures, designs, and engineers soft magnetic cores. Under that division, we have a line called Spang Engineered Solutions, which is a value-added designer and manufacturer of actual wound components. So we will make inductors, transformers, those types of components for customers who have very specific and demanding application requirements. And we have a division, Spang Power Electronics, whose business is in industrial power control. As VP of IT, I'm responsible for everything technology related or adjacent in the company. My job is to empower the folks who are out in front of the customer in the operating divisions, trying to sell, deliver, and service our products to be as productive, as capable, and as responsive as they're able to be.
Very good. Thanks for the intro. It sounds like you've got a pretty dispersed organization of probably some highly technical people. So in the context of Azure Files, what were the problems that you were trying to solve?
The problems we were trying to solve were that over the years, we became a more dispersed organization geographically than we had been. And that was originally just opening new facilities. So we'd open a manufacturing facility in China. Design and engineering would be at a headquarters building. That creates some issues with trying to figure out where in a wide area network folders, data, the resources that folks need to do their day-to-day jobs should live for optimum performance.
And if I recall, you had some long history of trying to solve this problem. What had you tried before Azure Files?
We had tried a couple of things before Azure Files. Going way back, we were using DFS replication between a couple of sites in the US. We were an edge case for DFS replication because we had, it turns out, people in both sites trying to edit the same things at the same time. We had more issues than I care to remember around version conflicts with documents, people doing work and finding that it had disappeared on them, those sorts of things. We said we're far enough outside of what replication's designed for. We're not doing that anymore. And we went to just a global DFS namespace and at that point tried to arrange the folders in ways that would make the most sense for geographic performance. It got to the point where picking one side of the transaction to have good performance and one side of the transaction to have bad performance wasn't working anymore. After looking at cloud solutions at that point and not finding anything that would work for us, we picked up a third-party WAN optimization solution that was your standard caching, compression, acceleration type of project. And we front-ended our file servers with that. It didn't work reliably. It was great. It did what we wanted when it was up and running, but the pre-population jobs would more frequently than we would like die for no reason, and more frequently than we would like, the tech support answer was just rebuild the whole pre-population job set and environment. We were very happy to see that Microsoft came out with Azure Files, and that looked to be, a cloud native service that would do the simple sounding thing that we wanted, which was make these old traditional SMB resources available and performant across our environment while still preserving everything about old traditional SMB resources that our users liked. We can still go through File Explorer and navigate our folder structure. We're not losing permissions. We're not losing security. All of those things were the things that prevented us from either just dumping this whole workload into SharePoint or picking up some of the more generic storage services that the public cloud providers had been offering to that point.
Great. Okay. Now, it sounds like you like the fact that it was kind of similar and like for like to what you're using. You just is more accessible. But were there concerns about moving files from on-prem to online? And what helped you overcome those concerns?
There really weren't organizational concerns. We've been in the Microsoft 365 environment, at least in part, for a number of years. So we were past a lot of the general initial worries about moving things into a public cloud environment.
How much time was your team spending before this move?
And really the management time was never our issue so much as the support load, the things we had to do reactively, either to field a complaint that performance was poor or field a complaint that the WAN optimization wasn't working. The issue we ran into was it was just really, really disruptive, and with our limited resources, impacted our project velocity, impacted our ability to do things that would move the organization forward. Now that we're on Azure Files, it is trending dramatically down. I'm not going to say that we've gotten it to zero. We had growing pains in the transition while we were moving data, and we had a couple of issues as we were learning and understanding the new environment. A couple of hiccups with DNS service and a lot of the core network things. We had some issues getting a handle on the environment, kind of understanding what we needed to monitor, what we needed to keep an eye on, what we needed to test periodically and alert ourselves if a service went down or a test failed. And now that we've gotten that, it's minor. We're back to a fairly set it and forget it SMB or traditional file share service, and that's a nice place to be.
Good. What was it that enabling technologies did to help Spang to get Azure Files rolled out, in your opinion?
It was all of the legwork, really. So what we brought enabling in to do was, first, we built this as a proof of concept. So we have, a little bit of Azure knowledge in-house. We know enough to run what we have, but the Azure Files was a service we hadn't touched. We didn't have a lot of experience with the networking we wound up doing to implement this solution globally and really make it work for us. We brought enabling in first to do a proof of concept. We had a narrow scope where they would set up an Azure Files environment. We would do a couple of sites worth of networking. We would put a couple of folders worth of things in it and run tests over a handful of configuration scenarios just so we could see that the solution worked and which of a few major config options would work best in our environment. So once that was built out, tested, and we had gotten some user acceptance, we continued working with enabling to extend that to our enterprise globally and to move the master the golden copy of our SMB resources into Azure in an orderly fashion.
Great. Thanks for the background. Were there any surprises along the way?
I wouldn't necessarily say there were any surprises. That the folks we were working with at Enabling were clearly experienced in Azure, were clearly experienced in file shares, had done this before. The biggest surprise to me would probably be that the actual back-end architecture that we had in mind or thought we wanted was not the way we wound up going once we tried a couple of things out in the field. I thought we would actually be replicating our master data across a couple of data centers to get the performance we needed in both the US and Asia. And we found that building a VPN tunnel from our Asia facilities to Azure really was enough to overcome any issues we had with access speed, and was a much more simple and cost-effective way to meet our performance needs.
A pleasant surprise then. Good
Definitely,
to hear.
definitely.
What have you done to address concerns about security and privacy?
Really, the benefit for addressing security and privacy concerns here was we could speak about this environment in terms that everyone already understands. It's the same user access and permissions rights that everyone is used to. We can talk about how it's accessed over a VPN, and that's how we've linked our sites for as long as I've been around, and everyone understands and is comfortable with that. I can address the fact that our Azure Files instance, those resources are not exposed to the internet. I can show that.
Good. You mentioned the user experience. Can you please tell us a little bit about what communication you gave your staff to make sure they knew what was coming and how they should work differently?
This was a process, and this was a migration that really didn't require a whole lot of coordination, disruption. The vast majority of the user base probably still doesn't know anything has changed.
What really have been the overall business improvements that you provided with Azure Files?
The overall business improvements have been that we've sped up some critical processes. The folks in China who are building some of our larger, more complicated systems are able to get firmware faster. They're able to get feedback on questions they have or design changes they need to make or divergences they've had to make from their prints faster. They don't have to wait overnight. They don't have to go get coffee or work on something else while their couple hundred megs of pictures upload. They can just do their work and get on with whatever is next without having to wait for the network. That's been the biggest benefit of that move.
Great. Yeah, you often hear the words velocity and agility used when it comes to the cloud, and often those are spin marketing kind of words, but in this case it sounds like that really did apply to Spang. That's great. Have you gotten any comments back from users specifically about their feedback or any general feeling from them?
The general feeling from the users who, I'll say the users who know, the users who are most affected by the need to pass things back and forth between the US and Asia has been that the experience is now what they'd have preferred it always was, or what it always should have been. So it's fulfilling, it's satisfying to me as a technologist, as the person responsible for giving these folks the tools and the systems they need to do their jobs well, that they now after all this time feel that they've got that they're being served appropriately, and that the technology's just there and it's not in the way.
This reminds me of the proverb: if at first you don't succeed, and you've tried and got it right now. Sounds good.
Definitely.
What did you think about working with enabling technologies, Brian?
I've really enjoyed working with enabling. The engineers on this project and a couple of other projects we've done have all been top notch. The design, the management, the flow of the project is as good as anyone I've ever worked with, and I'm just getting to a point where I more and more trust enabling and plan to look to them first as I have new complicated initiatives on the horizon.
That's all terrific feedback. Thank you. We feel the same way. Absolutely. And finally, in closing, Brian, is there any advice you'd like to give others that are in the situation that Spang had been?
The advice I would give is start small. You go with that proof of concept or the pilot implementation project like we did. That way, you're making, I'll say, small mistakes, or you're, going through an iterative process to figure out what of the many ways you can configure these products works best in your environment.
Very good advice. And much like the cloud, to be nimble to get there is very important. Well, thank you, Brian Buddymeyer from Spang, for this excellent conversation about Azure Files with enabling tech. We really appreciate your input and lessons learned today.
You're very welcome.